Hello, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Developing Teams That Work. We are very excited to have you with us. My name is Stacy Nisbet, and I'm going to be the host today. Before we get started, I'm just going to cover a few housekeeping items. The first is that we are recording today's session, so don't feel like you need to sort of take down notes about everything you see on the screen. You'll get a chance to have a copy of the slide deck as well as the full recording of the webinar in a few days' time after we are finished with today. The second thing I want to make sure I cover is that due to the relatively large size of the audience, we do have everyone in listen-only mode. That doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. While David's going through the presentation today, I'll be monitoring for questions that you have or comments or ideas or thoughts that you want to share based on some of the things that David is sharing with you all. So please use that question box to type those things in as we move through today. We'll pause a few times for questions. We'll get to as many as we can. Anything that we don't get to, we'll follow up with folks directly after the webinar as well. So now that we've talked a little bit about those housekeeping things, I think we've got some folks on with us who've been clients for many, many years and also some new faces today. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about MRG. MRG has been a global leader in assessment design for over 35 years. We offer assessments in the areas of leadership development, personal motivation and personal growth, as well as sales and customer service. Our research-backed assessments were developed really with this idea of wanting to foster a deep level of self-awareness and to inspire people and teams and organizations to chart their own unique paths towards growth and success and fulfillment. I think you're really going to see that with David's presentation today about team development. Lastly, MRG has certified practitioners in over 40 countries around the world, and we're really happy to have so many of them in such a great wide range of representation with us today. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about your presenter. David Ringwood joined us in 2006. He is a Vice President of Client Development for our EMEA region. David's got a really extensive consulting background, and he works with MRG's clients in all aspects of the business. He does sales work with us and supports folks through the certification process. He supports our existing customers in the work that they're doing, and also he does a good bit of consulting work for us as well. David's really passionate about assessment. I think you're going to see that today, and how it can be used to support people in both their professional development and their life journeys. So I'm going to stop talking and leave it to David to take you through today's presentation. David?
Thank you, Stacy, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be on this good earth. It's an absolute privilege to have you here, and I'm very grateful that you've taken the time to join us today, be it those who are on the webinar live or those who will subsequently listen to the recorded version. Although it's my voice that you're hearing today, I'm also very proud to represent all of the people in MRG. The research and the work that you see today represents a significant amount of work and endeavor and commitment on behalf of everyone in MRG. So I speak on their behalf as well as the presenter today. I'm going to just repeat what Stacy has said. You will get a copy of the slides. It's a lot of information to digest in a relatively short period of time. So please don't worry about trying to memorize all of this or take notes too extensively. Just note what you feel is relevant. We will be stopping for questions along the way and at the end, but we also will be taking questions and noting them for those that we do not get to during the presentation itself, and we will be responding to them subsequent to this webinar. So if we don't get around to you, or if you're concerned that there's too many other people firing questions in, you can put them in the chat box or email them to us, because we're very keen to get to everyone. In this research presentation, I will be referring at a very high level to different elements of research around gender, around generational, around cultural differences. Each of these are important areas of research in and of themselves, and you are very welcome to have the relevant slides and research associated with those topics. I'm not going to go into them in detail today, and that's intentional because it's not the purpose of the presentation, and we simply don't have time to do it. And I would not be able to do justice to any of these topics, as important as they are. But do feel free to come back to us and say that thing about gender or the country differences, I'd like to hear more. Our email address is right at the end. So, a few questions about you first. So we're interested in seeing how important the focus team development is. So Stacey is now opening the poll for you to do a very quick check-in on this. Stacey, do you want to drive it?
I do. We're getting some people are starting to respond now, so we'll give folks another couple of seconds. And while we're waiting for folks to plug in, I will remind everyone that as David moves through, if you've got questions or comments or things you want to add, please do put them into that question box as we move through. And when we have time to pause, I'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. We're up over 50%. We'd like to get to 90, so everybody needs to click in their answer. I'll give everybody another 2 or 3 seconds. And I will share the results. So David, interesting results here. We've got, let's see, 28% are consistently doing team dynamic work. 44% have some occasional team building exercises or activities. 18% addressing problems as they arise, and only 10% rarely doing any team dynamic work.
Okay, interesting. So the first 3 represent 90%.
Yep.
The first 2 a very, very significant percentage, 72% just in the first 2 categories alone. So it is a thing. We have one other brief question, and this is the last of the polls we're doing today. And it has to do with the extent to which psychometrics may or might not be relevant to this type of work. Stacey?
Yep, that poll is launched as well. We're getting good responses already. This one's going to be interesting because I'm curious really myself to learn more about how frequently folks are doing this kind of work when it comes to team development. I think we know a lot more about individual work than we do this, so I'm excited to hear what people have to say. Okay, we'll give everyone another 2 or 3 seconds. We're almost up to 80%. All right, I'm going to share the results of this poll. So 42% say they're almost always part of the work. 38% it depends on the engagement. 15% rarely, and only 5% avoid using them. Those are some good numbers.
Okay. Interesting. So the first 2, 80%. So again, it's a thing. Psychometrics are relevant. They are part of the practice in team development. So we're going to harness that. One thing I will emphasize before I get into some of the detail is that in my own professional domain of knowledge, as well as in my knowledge of the MRG tools, there are some good instruments out there which are really helpful when talking about team dynamics. So we have things like the Belbin team role. You have the Myers-Briggs type indicator, particularly step 2. You have the good old Lencioni, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. These can be used in addition to and in collaboration with MRG tools, not necessarily instead of. They dance very well together. We have actually done webinars on how they work together, or you can come and talk to us about the specifics of that. So we're not trying to replace anything that might well work. We're trying to supplement a topic which has never gone away, but everything we see suggests that it is becoming increasingly important. The collaboration approach, the change in the generational differences, some of which I'm going to indicate, does say that the trajectory is heading us more towards a collaborative, inclusive, facilitative approach to leadership and teamwork, instead of the slightly more traditional hierarchical top-down command and control style. Equally, when we look at where people are spending their time in organizations, Some interesting statistics there. 80%. We are far more dependent upon the exchange of information, the technology enablement that provides all of that, but also the time and the mission criticality that it implies. So these are only two statistics. We are providing you on the bottom of these pages with the relevant references so that you can go and do a deeper dive in your own time. I'm going to move on quickly because we've got a fair bit of content to get through. But any of these references are actually good reading in themselves and really fill out the picture about what's going on in leadership, in team dynamics, and where the direction is heading. So if we assume that it's a constant series of change, that the teamwork dynamic has always been there, that the majority of organizational effectiveness is not driven by process or task or strategy, it's driven by the people who enable and who operationalize all of those elements. And when you consider that in many cases, the single biggest cost and the biggest risk factor has to do with the human capital aspects of organizations, we have to boil this down to why is it important to get to teams that work? And there's plenty of, again, statistics that can be important to bear in mind. Engagement is the first of the topics that we really identified. I'm not going to read out every single one of these, but there is a significant cost on having people who are not fully engaged, doing things that they are intellectually capable of doing all day, but there's nothing in it for them. They're doing things that are not providing an element of reward and satisfaction and a sense of fulfillment, which is more of what next generation needs. We're going to get to that. So engagement is one of the reasons why this is important, and increasingly appears to be a dynamic. Of course, keeping people engaged is one thing. What about just keeping people, period? Retention. What really struck me was the first statistic on the left, the millennial. And these are real data. These are real research studies, in this case from Gallup. And the idea that they change the role, but they do so by leaving the organization, to that extent, 93% of the sample given, and the research study will go into more of the demographics, is quite stark in itself. And it is becoming increasingly a thing with high potential programs or with graduate entry, because keeping them is often the biggest challenge. They will do the 2-year rotational program and then they will go. The organization does not get its investment back. It is losing high potential to its competitors, having spent the time to train them and equip them with what they need to move to that next level. And of course, the final one then is an aspect of team which is inevitable when you put a bunch of people in a room, whether we like to think of it or not. And that's dealing with conflict. Conflict happens. When you put people who are different in an environment and put pressure on them to perform, and when those people don't fully understand each other and appreciate each other and have insight into how they're different, it increases the likelihood that you may get some degree of tension going on. It's not unreasonable. And it increases the consequence associated with that. We talked about engagement, retention, and conflict. I could list many other factors. Any one of these is significant in themselves. All three of these together is a very compelling argument to say that this is a topic that really demands attention. And that's in addition to all of the topics I could have talked about, but in the interest of time today, I've chosen not to. Here's an example when we talk about diversity. And diversity is going to be at the core of this presentation today. And again, to justify the fact that embracing diversity is an important piece. We're advocating, I guess, for less of the traditional top-down approach. And the purpose of this webinar, in fact, is even in the title of the webinar, was around a bottom-up approach. And I'm going to talk to that relative to diversity. Diverse teams, in a study done in 2009, a fairly large-scale study and a statistically quite robust one, I might add, did demonstrate that task performance was highly elevated in a diverse team relative to a homogeneous team. The graph on the extreme right is an interesting one because even though the performance was not as good with a homogeneous team compared to a diverse team, their perception was that they were better than they were. So they thought they were really good, but they only thought it. And then the one in the middle indicates how confident they were about that view. The homogeneous team do not perform as well as a diverse team, and yet they believe that they do, and they believe strongly in that view that they have. Diverse teams, it's quite the opposite. They perform really, really well. They don't perhaps perceive it as strongly as such, and they don't have perhaps the same magnitude of belief in all of that. And that alone is an interesting dynamic. Are there reasons why that is? Is diversity something that has to happen and is not fully embraced and leveraged in organizations, perhaps because they don't know how? There's lots of interesting challenges and rich discussions to be had around all of this. What I'd like to talk about is a very practical approach to this topic. So let's imagine a team of people, because my temptation is to go straight into statistics because we get really excited about things like that. But in the real world, we have living people walking around, breathing, working, doing what they do. And this is the person we're going to focus on today, Cassandra. Cassandra works with a couple of colleagues in her team. There's Andrew, smiling, seems happy enough. Penny, who seems even happier for reasons I don't quite understand. Bertram, sitting there looking slightly more somber. And then, of course, we have Julian in the bottom right. So what's going on with these people? So it's Monday morning, 9 a.m. Everyone is coming in. You have that Monday morning feeling. We all know what that feels like sometimes. And Andrew is engaging with Cassandra, and he wants to tell her all about what's going on the weekend, all the detail, all about the stuff with his son's lacrosse, went on Saturday, and that's what he's up to, first thing Monday morning. Penny, Penny's doing a thing about the website. They're relaunching it, they're redeveloping it, it's much more sophisticated, the branding is completely different. But no one knows what's going on. She hasn't updated anyone as yet. Bertram, well, who knows? Bertram has closed the door, the earphones are in, and off he goes. Any of you who are parents of millennials may recognize the symptoms. I can prescribe something for that. And finally, Julian is there, and Julian walks in the door with a whole bunch of questions. He wants to know. It's only Monday morning, it's 9 a.m., it's a little bit rich and it's a little bit early, and she hasn't had a coffee yet. 7 minutes later, having had that experience, what's going on with Cassandra? Well, she's getting a little bit frustrated because Cassandra has her own individual needs. Cassandra has her own individual preferences and biases. And let's understand what's going on. A lot of development, be it individual or team, focuses on behavior, and very legitimately so. Behavior is important because it's how we show up in any given context. Behavior is important because many job descriptions are articulated. Company competency or leadership models are often strongly behavioral in orientation. But why people do what they do, how much of the behavior reflects the person versus how much of that behavior reflects the way that they adapt to suit their environment. So when you look at someone's behavior, are you observing them or are you observing the version of them that shows up in their work environment? Who knows? You will never know, because the only thing you can observe about them are their behaviors. And we all adapt our behaviors when we come into work. We all adapt our behaviors based on organizational norms or expectations of us in our role, or the way things work around here, or in order to be successful, I kind of have to. And there's a point after which we're trying to be someone we're not. There's a point after which we do reach the threshold of doing things that we're perfectly capable of doing, but there's nothing in it for us. And that's a significant challenge. And behavior, of course, the whole proposition is you can change behavior. We can make behavioral choices. So it can change quite quickly and intentionally. Whereas when we look at motivation, it's measuring something very different. It's not measuring what we do, in fact. It's measuring what we find personally rewarding and fulfilling and satisfying. Doesn't mean we're doing it. That's behavior. People cannot observe your motivation unless you're trained to observe, like a clinical psychologist. The only thing you can observe about each other are their behaviors. And as I said earlier, you don't know. You don't know is the behavior reflecting the person or the way that they adapt to suit any given environment or situation. Motivation is closer to home. It's measuring the person. It's measuring things which are intrinsic to that individual. They are generally slightly more consistent or stable over time. If you're pathologically ambitious when you're in your early 20s, it might moderate a little bit, but it's unlikely to fundamentally change. Particularly the really hardwired stuff, the stuff that's always been there. But because motivation goes so deep, and because it goes so far back in our history, the likelihood is we normalize it. We normalize it to the extent that we don't even see it anymore. And we walk in the room with sets of assumptions and expectations and mindsets, and ways of interpreting things that we're not even cognizant of. And someone else who has a different motivational pattern will walk in an identical room with completely different sets of expectations and norms and such like. So it's really challenging because we can't observe that about each other. And yet, this is the key to understanding the team dynamic and to calibrating the behavioral choices that we make to suit each other and what they want. But we can only do that if we understand it about each other. And there are significant differences in motivation. And these are the slides I refer to when I say I'm going to give you a flavor of some of the components of the research. There are, in large-scale populations, reasonably significant differences motivationally by gender. We only indicate those which have a statistical significance. And with any psychometrics, please don't be too concerned about the labels. Labels and psychometrics are only conceptual placeholders. It's what we mean by them and the descriptions, which for those of you who are unfamiliar with some of these titles, we can talk a little bit more or give you the one-pager of definitions to help you as you download the findings of this research presentation. So women are more motivated by reciprocity, giving and receiving, the opportunity to contribute. Doesn't mean they're doing it. It means that they find it rewarding to do things for the benefit of other people, and they find it rewarding to, in return, get support and empathy from each other, that combination of giving and receiving. They value connectivity, belonging, being with people, not just physically present, but having bonds of loyalty and togetherness. And they value transparency, the expressing. They are more comfortable opening up, saying things in perhaps a more evocative way. There are fewer boundaries around that. But they are sensitive to what people think about them. The gaining stature. Gaining stature is satisfaction from being positively perceived. And some people really don't care what people think, the low scores. Whereas the high scores, what people think about them or what they think people think about them is particularly important. So when we think about motivation and keeping people engaged, sometimes recognition is a great currency. And for other people, it makes no difference. They'll take a compliment, but they'll take it anyway. It doesn't actually have any motivational value if they're low on gaining stature. And some people don't want recognition, gaining stature. They want attention, entertaining. I don't care what you think about me, just notice me. Entertaining. Some people are more comfortable in the limelight. These are, in a larger scale population, some of the differentiating factors between men versus women. But men There's a few other things going on. The maneuvering, which is satisfaction from advantage and lining things up to create the best possible outcome and trying to figure out and read between the lines and pick up nuances and subtleties. The competitive thing, winning. Well, there's probably no big surprise in there. There's a very well-known interpretive bias associated with winning. People who score high on winning interpret scenarios as competitions, whether they are or not. The traffic light goes green, it's Formula One, it's NASCAR, that instinctive pull to get away first. You know who you are in the audience. And we walk in the room with these things, and for us it's normal. And they may assume that other people are as competitive simply because they are. Controlling is satisfaction from assuming command, being in charge, driving things forward. There's no right or wrong with these. The nature of diversity is that what I find personally rewarding and fulfilling and satisfying is not going to be the same as any of the people on this webinar today. I'm talking to you individually. And that doesn't make me better than you, and it doesn't make me worse than you, but it sure as heck makes me different than you. And that's the appreciation I'm talking about. It's just understanding the descriptive nature of these things. People are different, not better or worse, and it's okay as long as we understand it and calibrate the types of behavioral choices that we make based on those observations and awareness, and vice versa. It really frees up a team environment, and I'm going to finish today with a specific example of that. Similarly, as we grow and hopefully learn, motivation does evolve over time. So when we do, now these are not longitudinal, they're cross-sectional, but still, when we look at those in their 20s and 30s compared to those in their 50s and 60s, there are differences in motivation. In our younger years, gaining stature and entertaining. So what people think about us is slightly more relevant. We find it rewarding. So the accolades and doing things for the sake of appearance and doing things that draw attention towards ourselves are more compelling. Irreproachability is about satisfaction from doing things on the basis of our principles, our values, our view of the world. They're more liberal. They're more open-minded. They're more willing to be influenced. They don't have a dogmatic black and white view of the world. Whereas in the, got to be careful here, I was going to say older years, but I realize I'm kind of myself in that category. So in our more advanced evolution of ourselves, there are some differences. Enduring tends to be lower. Enduring is satisfaction from being persistent and tenacious and determined. And sometimes when the scores get lower, we prefer the easier path, the path of less resistance. We prefer things to be more expedient. We prefer to do it in a way that's a bit more adaptable and agile and just go with the flow, which is structuring. Whereas high structuring is process-driven, rigid, you know, a really disciplined way of doing things. And again, maneuvering, low maneuvering, it prefers to work on the assumption of what you see is what you get. They prefer a world that's more straightforward, less complicated. It's not surprising. You've served your time. You've done the heavy lifting. It's time to pull back a little bit. And similarly, by region. Now, this is a very small and utterly inadequate representation of a huge study that we have on motivational differences. We also have a 228,000 leader study of behavioral differences for those who are interested. But this is motivational, and by comparison, it's relatively small. But Germany versus France, quite different. In Germany, perhaps less focus on some of the interpersonal piece. Giving is about emotional closeness if it's high, or emotional distance if it's lower, and this is lower. The actual research study, of course, will show the actual percentile rank differences. This is just a high-level description. So where giving is about emotional closeness or emotional distance, belonging is about social distance or social closeness. And there's something in the lower belonging, perhaps about being a bit more formal, perhaps a bit more serious, particularly when you bear in mind gaining stature is there and maintaining appearances. This is why in German society, I mean, the recognition of formal titles, Herr Doctor, Frau Doctor, Professor, they matter because they are markers of status. They communicate an element of respect. They are seen as appropriate. And if you don't do that, you may be interpreted as being overfamiliar, disrespectful, all of the things you would not want to do. In France, the expressing higher, so more comfort and more satisfaction from being open and saying things in a more direct way, but more receptive to the support of other people. The lower ranges on independence. High independence people want to do their own thing, their own way, on their own terms. So autonomy and freedom and a more autocratic style. This is one area, particularly given mobility and given the very international nature of work, even virtually, that is not going to go away and that is increasingly going to come to the fore. So let's get back to our example. There are many reasons, as you've seen, why this is important, but let's continue to tell the story. So we all live in our own skin. Our biases and the things that are important to us, which are very different to other people, but we would never know, cause us to react in certain ways internally, and we begin to tell the story. So we have the stories of Andrew. Andrew, if you recall, wants to fill her in on all his son's lacrosse win on Saturday. Cassandra's thinking, you know what, it's Monday morning, the meter is running, why are we talking about this? Is he not busy enough? Penny is the one who hasn't given anyone an update on the website launch. And she's thinking, I need to know what's going on. Maybe this, maybe that. She doesn't know. So the imagination can take over that conversation really quickly. And we've all been in that space. She's confused by what Bertram. The door is closed, the headphones are in. Is he having a bad day? Is there something going on? Did I say the wrong thing? I mean, it's confusing. And then Julian is the one who comes in asking 10 questions about the client meeting that afternoon. And she's like, hold on a second, what are you worried about? These experiences for the individual do not happen by accident. There are reasons why. And also bear in mind, we could do the same thing for any one of these things. The focus in this one is on Cassandra. We could do this for Andrew. We could do it for Penny, et cetera, et cetera. They all experience things in their own unique way. Let's look at some of the motivational reasons why. In Cassandra's case, is there half a chance that she scores high on the excelling? Excelling is internal. It's me versus me. It is my desire to push myself harder, for bigger, for better, for more. There are two biases that can sit at the top end of the excelling scale. Number one is a mindset bias, that is the never good enough mentality. And it is relentless. You get 20 steps ahead, get there, not good enough. Now I want this. You get there, not good enough. Now I want that. It's never good enough and never happy where they are. And this is why with Andrew, who wants to chit chat about stuff on the weekend, her reaction is, why doesn't he get to work? I mean, is he not busy enough? Because high excelling has a natural sense of urgency and they dismiss achievement really, really quickly. It's the never good enough thing. Belonging, well, Bertram has shut himself off in his office, put the headphones in. If Cassandra is high on belonging and really enjoys connectivity, she will have an interpersonal sensitivity. People who score high on belonging are sensitive to being excluded. And they will interpret scenarios as constituting exclusion very, very quickly. Bertram may be low on belonging. He walks in the office, he waves to people, he thinks he's being sociable, but he only thinks it. As far as Cassandra's concerned, he's being unfriendly. He's being unsociable. Maybe he has an attitude. Who knows? This is all in our imagination, and we do it every day. The structuring, when Penny hasn't sent the email, and when Julian is asking her 10 questions about it, if she's high on structuring, she's probably a little bit of a perfectionist. She's meticulous and organized and really enjoys doing things in a systematic and precise manner. So She will want to know that that project is on plan. She will already probably in her own mind get satisfaction from feeling on top of things. So when Julian questions her, it feels like it's a statement against her, not about what's going on in any given process. And we all do these things every day. The new report that we will be launching relatively soon looks at motivation from a thematic approach. And there are lots of themes or aspects of team dynamics that really make sense and are easily recognized by people. And here are some of them. There are, in fact, a total of 20 that we've defined. Trust, decision-making, interpersonal sensitivities, informational needs, collaboration, communication, dealing with complexity. I could go on. For each of these, there are a smaller subset of motivational characteristics that really load on them. And understanding about ourself is critical because, as I said earlier, we normalize it. This is hard to observe about ourselves. And once we understand where we are, then it's much easier for us to look around the room and really begin to understand what other people need, recognizing that their needs may be fundamentally different than ours. And that awareness becomes the basis of much better and much more lucid behavioral choice in support of our colleagues and the type of asymmetric reciprocity that can really free up an environment. And I'm going to give you a few examples of that. Why it matters, there are three themes that we talk about when behaviors and the underlying drivers are not aligned. Authenticity in leadership is always something that shows up, being who we are. If we spend time trying to be someone we're not because we're playing to the audience or the organization demands it, or that's the way things run around here, we can do it. We can do it all day. The problem is we can't sustain it. How long is it going to be before it comes out in the wash? If you're trying to be someone you're not, you've got to find energy every single morning to do things that you're capable of doing, but there's nothing in it for you. And finally, ask yourself the question, the people who are really doing things that they enjoy, it pays them back. They will be tired at night, but it's a tiredness of satisfaction and fulfillment. And I would go in the next day and do it all again. Versus those days when we go and we do things that feel futile and pointless. You're perfectly capable, but there's nothing in it for you. Are you really going to perform as well? Are you going to be as good a role model? Will people see the authenticity and the genuine enthusiasm? Or do you have to can it and try and sell it in a way that is going to be obvious fairly quickly? Again, any one of these are important. All three together really make the case pretty compelling. So what we've tried to do here is to take a slightly different approach, and I'm going to give you a few specific examples of a team dynamic using a bottom-up approach. Before I do that, I'm going to do a very quick check-in. Stacey, any comments or questions that we need to get to before I move on?
Nothing specifically that I think we want to cover here. I think people are just listening very intently, and maybe as we get into the more specific examples that you're about to get to, we'll have some questions then. So thanks for checking.
Good. Sure. So let's talk a little bit about the bottom-up approach. The contrast, of course, is the more historical top-down approach. And it's the devil we know, I have to say, because a lot of organizational competency models and leadership models and similar model-based approaches define across a bigger population something closer to the ideal. It is a top-down approach. There are certain sets of leadership competencies or behavioral ranges which epitomize the ideal within the organization or with a given region within an organization and so on, which is slightly more evaluative. If you fall outside of that, and in real terms, this is a very narrow definition, it means you fall outside of the ideal. How does this encourage diversity? It's the antithesis of diversity, in fact. It encourages people to conform to a highly homogenized view of the world where you have to align with a fairly narrow set of protocols or behaviors or values or such like. And we've all seen in the earlier slides the value that diversity can bring. And these are external statistics in independently peer-reviewed articles. We're not making them up. And we've seen what happens when conflict is there and people cannot be who they are, or they have to force behaviors on themselves in order to line up with people's expectations in this top-down model. And we see less of this. As an organization, we see a lot more bottom-up. We see a lot more of organizations who really want to say, look, let's not take this model-based view. Let's get to the core and let's understand more at the level of the individual, at the level of the team, and let's grow and develop organically. It is very consistent with the needs and expectations of newer generations, where that individual focus is becoming important. It allows organizations to understand people at a much deeper level. And it goes beyond the historical behavioral approach, which the model-based mentality brings, and focuses much more on understanding the uniqueness of those individuals and what motivates them, so that they, as an organization, can be much more sensitive to understanding what is the best way to empower and enable and retain, and all of the currencies we talked about earlier, these key people in our organization. It's perhaps less, I won't say efficient, it's less scalable, because a model is very convenient. You define it and you run it for 5 years and people have to conform to it. This takes a little bit more time, it takes a little bit more attention, and it takes a methodology that is different. But when you consider the consequence that we've looked at earlier on retention and engagement and dealing with conflict, getting it right versus getting it wrong is a big difference. And critically, it does allow and account for a much more diverse audience within the organization. So the bottom-up approach, as we see it, has 4 key components to it, starting from the bottom and working up. Self-awareness. We all are motivated in different ways. Those motivational factors come from our formative years, the first 10 to 12 being more important. They evolve over time. What we find rewarding in our 40s or 50s or 60s, there will be some differences than when we were in our early 20s. Life teaches us, does it not? Our perspective changes. We grow into our own skin. We observe ourselves in a very different and more complete way. It's not unusual. And it allows us to be, again, more complete and perhaps a little bit more objective as we look around the room. A lot of organizational narrative is around behavior and values. There is less narrative and dialogue around why we do what we do, what is important to us. So to have a way of being able to share the dialogue and the experience at that motivational level is important, because that drives the third piece, the team awareness. And once I understand the fact that I need all the nitty-gritty detail, but you don't, I may not have appreciated that before. I'm high structuring. I walk in the room with the assumption that other people are as fascinated with the granular detail as I am. There is no basis for that assumption. I just assume it. Whereas other people, they find that pedantic, they find it boring, they find it too much information. So I am in fact being very insensitive to them and not even realizing it. I think I'm helping them. So once we do this type of work and we build that mutual awareness and appreciation and respect and understanding and insight, that's where people can really begin to collaborate and make better behavioral choices. And now everyone has a part to play in that. So these slides I'm going to zip through simply because they capture some of the characteristics associated with these different elements of that. So I'm including them really for the purpose of the slide and the recording, rather than necessarily talking about them at length. But they are important. And particularly the final slide, when we come to the generational differences, I've given an example of 3 of the generational differences. But for those of you who have millennials, for those of you who have Generation Z children coming up, it's a very important aspect of diversity. And, you know, an interesting thing, Time magazine in May 2013 described millennials as lazy, entitled narcissists who live with their parents. Way to be judgmental. We prefer to take the view that these people are different. What they find rewarding is not the same as previous generations, and that's okay. They're just different. And understanding that means that we can make better choices. Principle one in psychology, you can't control what you don't understand. So let's go back and look at a very specific example. Let's put some flesh on the bone and go back to the team itself. Informational needs. When you think about how much time is spent, emails, meetings, telephone calls, committees, face-to-face, etc., and when you factor in how mission critical it is, getting it right versus getting it wrong is a huge difference, because getting it right builds understanding and appreciation and clarity and a focus. Getting it wrong creates confusion and paradox, and it builds mistrust and misunderstandings and all of the things you would not intentionally go near, no matter what the circumstances. So of all of the 20 themes that are available in the new team report coming out at the end of the month, this for me is probably a really important one, and one with very pragmatic implications. So we used an instrument called the Individual Directions Inventory, and this is one which does measure 17 underlying motivational characteristics of any individual. And of course, we can look at that for an individual, but we can also look at it for the team itself. And we can look at the overall patterns and see in what areas did the person really enjoy, in what areas is there less reward. And similarly, it provides a very practical approach. These are the labels that we use, but it helps the person to really understand what feels relevant to them. It helps the person to understand the biases they may walk in the room with because of the nature of motivation, the high winning, the competitive instinct, but the you versus me mentality, an oppositional mindset, that's a mindset bias, the high winning, the interpretive bias, everything is a competition, the high independence. High independence people, for no reason, interpret support from other people as interference because they're motivated to do their own thing, their own way, on their own terms. High giving, the very first one, an assumption bias. High giving are motivated to help other people, but they often assume, again for no reason, that other people want their support. And where's that written? Whereas high independence people interpret that very support as interference. So you think you're helping them, but you only think it. What you are in fact doing is making that person feel controlled and interfered with. The road to hell and good intentions, right there. And this happens every day in team dynamics. And also, in addition to the individual, you can look at where different people in the team are on any of the relevant scales for any of these themes. This is just a very simple snapshot. I'm going to move it on to the informational needs one because that allows us to look at a specific. And this is the team we talked about: Cassandra, Andrew, Julian, Penny, and Bertram. So Cassandra in receiving, and this is the theme of informational needs. She's slightly towards the right. Receiving, in the context of informational needs, is about the non-specific. Keep me informed, keep me in the loop. I like to know what's going on, and I like to know that I know. Particularly high scores, they find information not just informative, they find it reassuring. They worry. And they often need a strong element of immediacy. They need to know now. Now, here's a coincidence. Julian was the one who came in 9 a.m. Monday morning asking Cassandra 10 questions about the client meeting that afternoon. The 90th percentile on receiving. We can now understand that his need to know and his need to be kept in the loop and kept informed and need to know now is significant. Cassandra is at the 65th percentile. She may have what's known as an estimation error. She may underestimate just how important it is. It's reasonably important for her, but it's extremely important for Julian, and she may not know that because these are not observable characteristics. These are not behaviors. But with Penny in particular and Bertram, they may really not have any clue just how important it is. And these are the people who have to collaborate and support each other and inform each other. Similarly, interpreting. Interpreting is a specific need. Receiving is how much, the constant flow, but interpreting is the why. Why are we doing this? Why is it important? Give me some context. If you go straight into the checklist with some people, you're just going to confuse them because they need to know the rationale. They need to know the purpose. Why is this important? Why are we even talking about it? If you don't frame it up for them in a certain way, particularly those who score high, then the detail makes no sense to them because they cannot organize it in their mind. High interpreting people need clarity of thought. Then the detail makes sense to them. And Cassandra, who is the blue one there, might not appreciate that as much about the two other people, Penny and Julian. Structuring. Receiving is how much, interpreting is why, structuring is how. I don't care about the concept. I need to know the method. And I need you to be tangible, not conceptual. And I need you to be granular and specific. I need to know exactly, chapter and verse, how it works. Now, we can see here, Julian is very high in most of these. 90% on receiving, 99 on interpreting, 60 on structuring. His informational needs are significant. I'm not surprised he's walking in the room on Monday morning, needing to know, needing all the granular detail and so on. And Penny is the one who is saying, the perception is she's given no one an update on the website relaunch. Cassandra is losing her mind. Her reaction is, why won't she send an email? Maybe the project is behind schedule. It's because Cassandra needs the update, the 65th percentile on interpreting. She doesn't need a bigger picture interpreting, but she does need to know exactly how things are going, 70th percentile on structuring. It explains a lot of her reactions. And the final one for the purpose of today is stability. Stability is when? High stability people are cautious. They do not like surprises. They like to see things coming. So last minute information they are very uncomfortable with. And here's Julian again, which is why he doesn't want to leave it until early afternoon, 10 minutes before the client meeting to ask questions about that client meeting. 9 a.m. Monday morning, he's in there first thing before the coffee machine is even warmed up. He's in there asking loads of questions on what if this happens and what if that happens, and off they go. I'm sure we've all met one of them. And now we can understand as you look around the room. There are 4 coaching questions that typically go with a theme of informational needs. Number 1, do I understand my own needs? It's a very important start. It explains a lot. It explains times when we feel confused. It explains times when we don't fully understand things. It explains times when we feel informationally excluded. The high receiving, they hate. Why am I always the last one to find out? Why does that always happen? They need to know, and they need to know that they know it's metacognitive. So understanding my own needs is question number 1. Question number 2 is, have I shared those needs with other people so that they can support me in the way that's relevant and take away everything that's not? Penny is 10 on receiving. So is Bertram in the lower ranges. The constant update, the copying them on emails, it's noise. It's irrelevant. It's actually distracting for them, and they cannot fathom why someone would do it. And if we help people to understand what we need, it's very constructive, because don't forget, if not, they're wasting their time as well as your time, giving you information which is not relevant. But also, if I understand what any of you need, now I know as a colleague of yours that what I'm doing is actually relevant. I know that I'm actually making a difference. That makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I'm being really helpful. It makes me feel like I understand you better. It grows trust, it grows appreciation, it grows respect, it grows understanding. You can't buy stuff like this. The third and possibly more challenging question is, do you have the vaguest idea what other people need, recognizing that their needs may be fundamentally different than yours? And the fourth and slightly cynical question is, how do you know? Are you guessing? Are you making up as you go along? Have you asked people? Because otherwise we might rely on our own assumptions and biases. I'm high structuring. I tend to over-explain. You probably got that. I assume that people are as interested in the nitty-gritty as I am. But they're not. And I need to remind myself of that. I'm low receiving. I forget that other people like to be kept in the loop. Sometimes it doesn't even occur to me. And it's not an intentional thing, but if the driver is not there, then the awareness may not be as lucid and as active as it might be in service of being a good citizen and a good colleague. So there are legitimate challenges for any of us in any of these things. And the team report does identify the biases at both the individual and the team level. And it looks at patterns of where the team as a whole are going to get more energy from and less energy from. And of course, when you think about their ultimate objectives and the things that they may need to invest in behaviorally in service of their objectives, even if the energy is not there, or think about role. You know, who are the ones, the people driving innovation, if they're high on the creating driver and they enjoy discovery and exploration and newness and things that are unique, let them at it. And let the high structuring people work through the nitty-gritty. Let the high controlling people drive it all. You know, it's easy to cut our cloth and let people do the things that they really are passionate about and get them away from the stuff that they'll never get anything from. It will never pay them back. So there are next step suggestions as well. I think it's always important to give people food for thought and where do we go next or what should we be thinking about as they process all of these things. And that's just a practical step. And the final thing I promised you is about the generational differences. This again is a very small snippet of a very substantial and very important research piece that we've actually co-authored with IMD Business School in Switzerland. And you're welcome to a copy of that article as well if you're interested. Boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. Boomers, give or take, kind of 40s up to late 50s. You can debate about the cutoff points. Gen X, early 60s to kind of late 70s, give or take. Gen Y, the millennials, the me generation, probably up to a bit about the mid-90s, give or take, and Gen Z thereafter, the most recent generation. Three drivers: creating satisfaction from doing things which are new and different and innovation and discovery; independence, satisfaction from doing my thing, my way, my terms, the need for freedom and autonomy. Excelling is the me versus me, internal. My desire to push myself very hard for bigger, for better, for more. Expectations-led people, high expectations. Where's the direction taking us? The boomers and Gen X are pretty similar. In fact, across the drivers, all 17, there aren't significant statistical differences between boomers and Gen X, which is surprising considering everything that happened between the late 40s and the late 70s. Think cultural, technological change, economic fluctuation. I mean, the world was a very different place by the late 70s compared to the mid 40s. Creating is going down for millennials. Hold on a second, aren't these the bright new things? Aren't these the innovators? Here's the question, are newer generations the originators of innovation, or are they the consumers of innovation? It's a reasonable question. Generation Z continues the trend because one of the questions was it a one-off? Was this just a fluctuation, an anomaly, or is the trajectory continuing when you get to Gen Z? Everything we see suggests that the appetite for new and bigger and more and the innovative piece is decreasing. The independence, similarly, the boomers and Gen X, not that difference. Swinging down for millennials and Generation Z. These are median values. It takes quite a lot to move a median to that extent. Bearing in mind with Gen Z, because it's a median, 50% are below that. So the desire to stand on your own 2 feet and do things in a way that's much more autonomous is decreasing. It does also identify a far more democratic approach to decision making. They are receptive to the support of other people, making my own decision, my own way, my own terms. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, is less of the currency. Again, identifying a facilitative approach to leadership as one which is really coming to the fore compared to the command and control. And finally, excelling, the me versus me. increasing for millennials, higher expectations, but because of the independence, less about doing it themselves and doing it autonomously. They want greater success, but they want it in a way that is more and more supported by their environment because independence is decreasing. And finally, Generation Z. Have a look at that. Massively elevated ranges at the median level, 50% or above that, but also a very lower range or left-hand range on independence. So the rules of the games are changing. We make assumptions about what motivates people. And if we come from a certain generation, we may rely on those assumptions, which now may be less relevant. Respecting the fact that within any of this, there is still enormous diversity. And we have to be careful about going back to where we started. We can talk about generation and gender and cultural difference all day. Every single person is unique. How's that for diversity? And that's why the bottom-up approach is really one which is coming to the fore, where the tools that can actually go and measure and describe and facilitate the conversation can be potentially a very important and very compelling piece as we look at the development of teams. And that, as they say, is that. We have a few other things to get to. We perhaps have time for a few questions. We have some certifications coming up in the following while, but it is that time when I need to hand back to Stacey. Stacey, over to you.
Yes, thank you, David. Thanks for a great session. We really didn't get too many questions. There are a couple. I've been able to answer some just in line directly with folks, but we'll be sure to follow up on anything that we didn't get to in our follow-up to folks in a few days' time. And as we mentioned before, the webinar is being recorded, and you will also get access to the slide deck. So thank you all for coming today. David, thanks for some valuable information, and I look forward to connecting with lots of you in the near future. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.